Chapter 303, Raizakia 9. Motherfucker getting all sentimental and shit just because he's dying, Eugene grumbled, spitting blood on the ground. Raizakia was dead. The black dragon wasn't an undead like a lich or a death knight with a separate life vessel, and Eugene had severed his dragon heart in half. Even if Raizakia was the demon dragon, he could never survive such a blow. Did Eugene's heart sink at the thought of being denied the coveted prize of the ancient dragon's heart? No, there was no room for disappointment within him. Raizakia's dragon heart had been marred and contaminated by the sinister forces of dark power for centuries. While it held immense value for black wizards and other demon folks, for Eugene, it remained a worthless and venomous artifact devoid of any worth. Eugene slowly descended to the ground, cracking his stiff neck. The headless, large body of the dragon was slowly tilting to the side. The holy sword was easier to handle and use compared to the moonlight sword when it came to simply cutting. As such, Eugene raised the holy sword after eyeballing the location of his target. Rip. The holy sword cut through the dragon's stomach. The light of the sword cut through the scales and flesh of the dragon, as well as the dragon's large belly. The only thing Raizakia had consumed for hundreds of years was Rhaenyra, whom he had swallowed whole just a while ago. Eugene had been expecting a spillage of gastric juices, but unexpectedly he found Rhaenyra in an unexpectedly clean state. Rhaenyra was unconscious, curled up into a ball inside the black dragon's stomach. Eugene pulled her out. Her clothes were fully intact and there wasn't a single injury on her either. However, she didn't appear to be in the best condition, probably due to the cold sweats and tears she had shed. Eugene clicked his tongue when he saw that only the whites of Rhaenyra's eyes were visible in her fainted state. She shouldn't say anything about me killing her father since she was swallowed whole and almost killed, Eugene thought. In the first place, Raizakia could not be called her father. There was no paternal love and filial piety between the two to begin with. Eugene could not be bothered to wake Rhaenyra and explain the situation to her, so he placed her inside his cloak in her fainted state. Mare would do the explaining in his stead once she came to her senses later. Mare was delighted with Rhaenyra's survival, but she didn't rush to wake the hatchling. Right now, Sienna was more important to her than Rhaenyra. Lady Sienna! Mare shouted as she ran out of the cloak. Now that Raizakia was dead, she finally wanted to share a moment of reunion with Sienna. However, Mare halted on the spot instead of running to Sienna. It was because Sienna's body was slowly dispersing. Mare sniffled with great anxiety. "Why are you crying?" asked Sienna with a mischievous smile. Mare simply swallowed her tears without being able to respond. Sienna watched Mare with loving eyes, then clicked her tongue and wiggled her finger. "This is an inevitable thing. Just as it was an impossible but inevitable miracle that brought me to this place." "Lady Sienna. Are you going to disappear, Lady Sienna?" asked Mare. "Huh. Well, I'm disappearing now," answered Sienna. In truth, Eugene was slightly nervous as well. He had gone through so much trouble to kill Raizakia. But what if Sienna had risked her own existence in exchange for the miracle that allowed her to save Eugene? What if she had sacrificed herself for Eugene? "I'm asking this just in case, but are you going to die?" asked Eugene, his voice trembling with sadness and anxiety. "Are you crazy?" retorted Sienna with an incredulous expression. "Do you want me to die and disappear like this?" "No. Then why are you saying something so crazy?" "Why would I die?" shouted Sienna. "It's just... well, I thought you might have been prepared to die to save me." Eugene trailed off. "I was prepared but not to die," said Sienna. "Prepared for what?" asked Eugene. "Prepared to give you my lips without resisting when you were overcome with your emotions and rushed towards me, you bastard." Sienna barely managed to keep the words from spilling out of her mouth. Right, today wasn't the only day she had left? She thought to herself as she watched her disappearing hand. "Ahem, that seems to be none of your business. Everything turned out fine, didn't it?" said Sienna. "It did," agreed Eugene. "You don't need to worry about me, Hamel. I did overexert myself slightly, but well, I'm going to return to my body and..." Sienna paused, then peered at Eugene. "I'm telling you in advance, but don't come to the World Tree to greet me for no reason. I'm going to get really mad." "Why?" asked Eugene. He couldn't understand why she was demanding such a thing. They had met and she had helped him. More importantly, the territory of the World Tree wasn't even far off. It would take Eugene only a day or half a day to reach the World Tree. Then wasn't it better for him to meet Sienna there? Wouldn't it be a beautiful sight for him to greet Sienna as she was released from her seal and resurrected? Eugene sincerely thought so, but Sienna was resolute. No is a no. I'll really kill you, said Sienna curtly. Her reasoning was simple. The poison that tainted her body would have been purified with Raizakia's death, so she could regenerate her body away from the protection of the World Tree. But Sienna did not want to show Eugene the process. Eugene had already seen Sienna with a hole in her chest before, but it had been an inevitable, unexpected occurrence. Sienna still had to restore the hole in her chest, reconstruct her broken body, and prepare for this and that. She didn't want to show Eugene what she didn't have to. Then what do you want me to do? Asked Eugene. What do you mean? Well, we can just promise to meet somewhere. Right, how about in a month? Suggested Sienna. Where? Eugene asked with a frown. Sienna took a deep breath. Where? There was only one place she could think of. A place where she had spent most of her life, a place where she had transcribed her happy, brilliant memories to escape solitude. It was a place close to the forest with good air, a place with tall, sapphire skies, and a place crowded with stars at night. It was a place with gentle streams instead of the salty, windy sea. My house. It should be there, right? Said Sienna. She had built her ideal house, leaving a detached house to use as a study and a large fireplace to illuminate it. She had even furnished it with soft, rocking chairs. I'll meet you there. However, there was a crucial issue. Sienna's mansion had been located in such a place 3 centuries ago, but too much time had passed. To be precise, the land around her mansion had undergone development. The forest had been cleared into Meridian Square and the streams filled. Fortunately, the mansion remained intact, but the house that Sienna was envisioning had already disappeared 300 years ago. Of course, Sienna remained ignorant of this fact. I only managed to keep half of my promise. I said I would call you by your current name instead of Hamel the next time I saw you. Sienna laughed while rubbing her eyes with the back of her hand. Do you remember? I told you not to come for me. I told you to wait so that I could come to you. I remember, responded Eugene. I'm glad that I wasn't late. I'm glad I could find you and save you. Despite having wiped her eyes, tears still found passage down her cheeks. Sienna turned towards Mare without bothering to wipe away her tears. Mare. Why yes, Lady Sienna. Come here. I'll be disappearing soon, but I want to hold you while I'm still here, continued Sienna. Mare ran into Sienna's embrace with tears running down her cheeks. Sienna smiled while taking Mare into her arms and stroked her head. I heard that things were tough while I was gone, said Sienna. I'm fine, answered Mare. Even if you're fine, I'm not fine with it. It's funny for me to say this after I've disappeared so irresponsibly, but you must have been very lonely. It must have been very hard, said Sienna. Tears continued to fall as Mare remained silent. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I should have given you a reason before leaving, Sienna apologized sincerely. I heard about it from Sir Eugene. Lady Sienna, you couldn't come back because of an unexpected accident. I don't blame you, Lady Sienna, answered Mare. He meant it. She had only worried about Sienna but never once blamed her. Feeling Mare's sincerity, Sienna took her tighter into her embrace. Thank you for helping Hamel in my stead, said Sienna. Sniff. I am very proud of you, Mare Meridian. Mare felt her heart filling with joy at Sienna's words. However, she couldn't remain fixated on her happiness. Mare whispered into Sienna's ear, conscious that Sienna was disappearing. Shouldn't you hug Sir Eugene as well? Huh. Lady Sienna, if possible, I would like you and Sir Eugene to hug with me in the middle, said Mare. It was an unexpected comment. Sienna felt her head turn blank and could only open and close her mouth with a dazed expression. Mare squinted when she looked up and saw Sienna's expression. Kiske. She had never expected Sienna to be this embarrassed. Mare decided that she needed to use some shock therapy. You'll get in trouble if you get embarrassed like this, Lady Sienna, said Mare. What? What are you talking about? Me embarrassed? Asked Sienna. You have to steel yourself, Lady Sienna. These days, foxes are circling around Sir Eugene. No, it'd be more appropriate to call them starved wolves, warned Mare. Wolves? What wolves? Sienna shook her head with shame and confusion. Mare drew back from Sienna with a deep sigh. Well, it'll be faster for you to see it in person than hearing it from me, said Mare. Wait. Mare, wait, you come back here. Speak so I can understand, shouted Sienna, attempting to catch Mare. However, she could not move her disappearing form with ease. Her body was already half gone, and her soul was returning back to the world tree. Eugene had heard the conversation between the two. Not foxes but starved wolves. Eugene recalled the fluffy but hefty weight that had rested on his head just before he entered this place. He remembered how the two had courted him with tearful eyes. Certainly they were more like wolves than foxes. Ehem. Eugene could only clear his throat. There was not enough time for him to explain everything to Sienna. As such, Eugene decided to pass the catastrophic task to his future self. Then a month from today, let's meet at your mansion in Arath, said Eugene. Set the exact time and date. I don't want to wait and I don't want you to wait either. 30 days from now noon. Got it? Asked Sienna. Yeah, answered Eugene with a smile, raising his hand towards Sienna. See you then, Hamel. No, said Sienna, staring at Eugene. She felt a flutter that reached all the way down to her soul. Unlike Hamel, his hair was gray, his clean skin was without a single scar, and he had golden eyes like a pair of jewels. Although there was absolutely no resemblance, the man in front of her was Hamel, whom Sienna had missed and loved. Eugene Lionheart. She opted to use his current name. What name he had in his past life wasn't important. What was important was that the soul residing in his body was the man Sienna loved, even if his body had completely changed. Sienna giggled shyly with embarrassment. Let's meet in a... Just before she disappeared completely, she was cut short when she saw Eugene raising his hand. It was his left hand. His ring finger. What? Why? A ring? Why? What? Sienna's eyes started quivering and the light glimmering in her green eyes snuffed out. Wolves? Starving? Hey you little... Sienna's desperate cry was cut short. Fush. She disappeared, scattering into particles of light. Eugene tilted his head with confusion as he watched the scattering light. Sienna was gone, and only Akasha was left floating in the air. Eugene grumbled as he took Akasha into his hand. What was she trying to say? I don't know, answered Mare. Her expression was unusual, muttered Eugene. I couldn't see it well because it was so bright and shiny. Maybe she was sad that she had so little time to say goodbye to you, Sir Eugene, suggested Mare. It was true that Mare had not seen Sienna's face at the end. She had only seen Sienna's face turn red and shy like an adolescent girl. Naturally, she assumed that Sienna could have been overwhelmed with emotion before disappearing. Is that so? Eugene wasn't completely convinced, but he decided to go with it for now. He looked back. Although Raizakia's dragon heart had been destroyed, his body remained. Originally, dragons did not leave behind their bodies unless they wished. Most dragons chose not to leave behind their remains but return everything they had and were to the world as mana before becoming ashes. But this was a place between dimensions and Raizakia was a fallen demon dragon. Even if Raizakia wished, the world would not take his body. I have a present to take home with me, said Eugene. Although the corpse belonged to the demon dragon with the dragon heart destroyed, it could be used as material if purified properly. With all the bones, leather and scales that remained, such a large corpse could be used to arm all of the Lionheart's knights. With a grin, Eugene placed his hand on Raizakia's body, then opened the dimensional door with a kuh. Chapter 304, Raizakia 10. After Eugene stepped into the gap between dimensions, Christina knelt on the ground and started praying. She beseeched the god of light for Eugene's safe return. Cyan had also knelt beside Christina. Though he wasn't a follower of the god of light, he too offered prayers for his brother's safety. After all, faith wasn't a prerequisite for such a plea. Lovelian was the first to detect the anomaly. He had been wandering aimlessly in the vicinity with a face full of worry when he noticed a distortion spreading across the clear sky. What is that? Melkith, who had been seated on a boulder communicating with the spirits, stood up abruptly when she noticed the disruption. Christina and Cyan raised their heads and suddenly the distortion grew larger, turning into a fracture in the sky. Soon after, the fracture silently split open and Eugene dropped out from its center. Sir Eugene! Christina cried out in surprise. She had not been expecting him to return so quickly. Barely an hour had passed since Eugene had entered the dimensional rift. Could he have slain Raizakia in such a short time? Her questions were immediately answered. A gigantic corpse of a dragon fell right behind Eugene. It belonged to Raizakia, the demon dragon. The deep wound on his neck made it appear as if his head was on the verge of separating completely, but not a single drop of blood flowed from the wound. Kaya! Melkith burst out into a high-pitched scream. Her eyes flipped to show their whites as she flung her arms toward Raizakia's falling corpse. It was almost as if she wished to be crushed under the falling corpse. Naturally, Melkith had no intention of meeting her demise by being crushed with the enormous weight. However, the graceful curves of its massive form, the smooth black scales, and the near-metallic bones visible in the cross-section of the deep wound on its neck were incredibly alluring to her. Melkith's White Tower was not only a hub for spirit magic but also alchemy. Thus, Melkith possessed a fair knowledge of alchemy, despite being the master of spirit magic. But no. Even a wizard, not just an alchemist, would be thrilled to see such a well-preserved corpse of an ancient dragon. "Are you just going to stand there?" said Eugene, shooting Melkith a reproachful glance. Lovelian hurried over and attempted to drag her away, but Melkith stubbornly resisted, clinging to Lovelian. "Why, you can have me. I'll give you everything I have. Just give me that," she shouted with excitement. "Stop talking nonsense and go," Eugene grumbled, stretching his hand toward the sky. The mana Eugene conjured suspended Raizakia's gigantic corpse in midair momentarily. He let out a long sigh while slowly laying the massive body onto the barren land. "It's so damn big," he complained. The dimensional rift had been a dark, empty space, which made it hard to estimate Raizakia's true size. But now, with the surrounding scenery for comparison, the enormity of the dragon's size could be fully appreciated. The corpse of Raizakia was large enough to rival a sizable castle. "I must have been out of my mind," Eugene grumbled inwardly. He had engaged in close combat with that enormous beast. Eugene shivered as he glanced at Raizakia's gigantic tail, recalling the blow he had taken from it. He knew that the force of that single hit could have easily killed him. "My body hasn't fully recovered." Eugene realized and examined his body with a grimace. He had barely managed to survive, thanks to the world tree and the light of the spirits. He would have been dead if their timely intervention had been just a moment later. It truly had been a miracle. It was as Sienna had said. Eugene could not find any other words to describe it. His broken heart and core had healed, and even his bones, flesh, and internal organs had mended together. However, he could not consider himself fully healed. Judging from how his flow of mana felt obstructed, he would need to rest for a good while to recover fully. Given that he had used ignition twice in a row, a technique that usually caused him to be bedridden for days after a single use, it was nothing short of a miracle that he was able to stand on his own. "Sir Eugene." The examination of his condition was cut short by a shout. Christina had flung herself onto him from behind. Eugene tried his best to ignore the soft, malleable sensation pressing into his back and coughed awkwardly. "Are you safe? You're really safe? You're not hurt at all?" Christina's barrage of questions gave away her anxiety. "Oh, I did almost die, but I somehow managed to survive," responded Eugene. What do you mean by that?" Christina asked urgently. Eugene managed to squirm away from her, then turned to see that she was already in tears. "Hold on, just hold on. I'll explain everything," he said hurriedly. Cyan was also approaching him, and Lovelian had a look of immense curiosity. "And Melkith?" She was stealthily approaching Raizakia's corpse. "If you want even a single scale, you better behave yourself," said Eugene. "You're getting more and more insolent, aren't you?" retorted Melkith. "That's because, Lady Melkith, you are becoming less and less respectable," said Eugene. Or had she been like that from the very beginning? Eugene cast Melkith a sideways glance, who displayed none of the dignity expected of an arch-wizard. Melkith turned elegantly before returning to Lovelian's side, acting as if nothing had happened. "So, what happened was..." Eugene had no intention of discussing the true nature of the Moonlight Sword, his suspicions about Vermouth and any such matters. These topics were for him to discuss with Anise and Sienna. Instead, he delved into the battle with Raizakia, the dark power Raizakia had stolen from the power Edmund had gathered for the ritual and the help he received from Sienna during the battle. "Are you saying Lady Sienna helped you?" Lovelian asked with surprise. "Apparently she received the help of the World Tree. Honestly, if Lady Sienna had not helped, I would have died," Eugene responded. If Raizakia had been weakened as he had initially thought, victory would not have been impossible. Though difficult, Eugene thought. I'm wondering if Balzac had something to do with this. Maybe he was behind all this, Eugene grumbled while grimacing. Lovelian shook his head after a moment's thought. I don't think so. You said it yourself that the demon dragon was the first to speak. Edmund had coveted the dragon's power, and his ritual and magic fell apart with his death. For a dragon such as Raizakia, it would not have been a difficult task to seize the scattering power before his connection to Edmund was severed. You seem surprisingly defensive of Balzac, Eugene grumbled. I simply don't support unfounded accusations and suspicions. To be honest, I don't particularly like the Black Tower Master, but his wish was quite touching, said Lovelian with a bitter smile. There was one thing Eugene was sure of. Throughout his past and present life, Lovelian was the most honorable mage he had met. What's wrong with Lady Sienna's character? Mare complained. Frankly, she's not an outstanding citizen. I'm going to tell Lady Sienna. Do tell Tattletale, Eugene mocked before clearing his face. Anyways, everything ended well. We almost died, but we didn't. Instead, we killed Raizakia and even saved Lady Sienna. She won't be able to return immediately, but she did say she would come to Aroth after recovering her strength, said Eugene. To Aroth? Asked Lovelian, his face turning a shade paler. In the past, when Eugene revealed his ownership of Akasha, the Kingdom of Aroth held a hearing on whether to officially recognize Eugene as the Master of Akasha. And she said to me that she will return to the Aroth and knock over the whole country. Lady Sienna is not only alive but also furious with Aroth. I am not sure how she will vent her wrath. As far as I know, the Abram Palace was a gift from Lady Sienna. The lake that surrounds the palace was also made by Lady Sienna. Isn't the palace's Devil Seal Circle also the work of Lady Sienna? So, she might drown the whole palace. Or else, she might pour a meteor shower on the palace. It's none of my business, though. You don't need to worry, Eugene assured with a wink. Didn't I tell you during the hearing? Neither you nor the Red Tower will suffer any harm from Lady Sienna's wrath. That's not what's important. Aroth is not prepared for Lady Sienna's return. We need to make contact immediately, Anne, mumbled Lovelian. I don't think Lady Sienna would appreciate that. Perhaps it would be better for us all to stay quiet and avoid her wrath, Eugene suggested. What about me? What should I do, Eugene? I helped you a lot this time around, right? Don't just worry about the Red Tower. Take care of the White Tower as well, will you? Malkith asked, immediately changing her stance and attempting to butter him up. Eugene stopped her advance and pushed her away with mana as he continued to speak. Anyway, I think it would be better not to inform Aroth about Lady Sienna's return. If word gets out prematurely. We certainly need to be cautious about that. Lovelian had no choice but to agree. Eugene had a valid point. What are you going to do about this? He asked, pointing at Raizakia's corpse. The dragon's corpse was as big as a castle, but what was important wasn't its size. It wasn't just the corpse of any random creature or monster, but the body of Raizakia, a millennium-old dragon considered the best, strongest, and also the worst. Cyan was overwhelmed by the sight and barely managed to speak up. Are we going to bury it here and hold a funeral? He asked tentatively. Are you out of your mind? Why would we bury such a valuable thing? It's a trophy. Lady Ancilla will be thrilled if we bring it back to the Lionheart family, explained Eugene. A trophy? The corpse of a dragon? Cyan looked alternatingly at Eugene and the corpse with disbelief. There's nothing to waste in the corpse of a dragon, but that's only the case with normal dragons. But now, we'll have to throw away quite a bit of it. Especially the blood, we absolutely cannot use it. The flesh, meat? Maybe we could cook and eat it, but I'm afraid it might do more harm than good, continued Eugene. There is a rumor that you can gain immortality by eating dragon meat, said Malkith with gleaming eyes. Of course, no one's ever verified it. They say that if you eat dragon meat, other dragons will definitely find out and come to kill you. But couldn't that be proof? The dragons come to kill and you end up dead. Means that it's just a ridiculous myth after all. I mean, who would believe such things in this day and age? Then Lady Malkith, why are you bent on so many myths? Asked Eugene. Myths? What are you talking about? I don't believe in myths. Everything I do is based on truths that I have personally verified. Melkith was quite confident on this matter, and in fact she had succeeded in forming contracts with 3 spirit kings. "The meat will probably be inedible," said Christina after collecting herself enough to speak. "It's like you said, Sir Eugene. Like its blood, the flesh of the demon dragon is likely to be extremely toxic to humans. The bones, scales, skin and teeth could be useful though," Eugene suggested. "Purified they might be, but given their size and scale, it will take quite a bit of time," responded Christina. "There's no need to rush. I will just seal it for now, store it in my cloak and take it around with me," said Eugene. But as he spoke he realized his mistake. It wasn't only Mare who resided in his cloak now, but Rhaenyra as well. Rhaenyra had recently come to her senses and was being briefed by Mare on what had taken place. Even so, would it not be insensitive to store Raizekia's corpse right next to Rhaenyra? "Well, I'll just have them come out of the cloak," Eugene thought. It wasn't a big deal. "First, let me return this to you," Eugene said, taking off the rosary from his neck. His action caused Christina's expression to suddenly change. "Christina," Anise called out urgently. "No, sister. We already have an agreement. This grace is for me to enjoy and for me alone." "How cruel. Don't you pity me? I'm already dead." "No, I don't." She gave a curt, unwavering answer, unwilling to cede even an inch. Even Anise, who was usually sly, was at a loss for words at her cold response. Christina took off her hat, pushed back her lush blonde hair with both hands, then slowly made her way in front of Eugene before kneeling on one knee. "Please," she whispered in a sweet, gentle voice. It wasn't anything important, but Eugene couldn't help but gulp as he looked down at her. Having brushed her golden hair aside, Christina had exposed her neck, which was as smooth as ivory and gleamed with sweat. "Ah, ehem." Eugene cleared his throat, then bent down to place the rosary around Christina's neck. His mouth felt dry when he caught a whiff of a fragrance emanating from Christina. "Just die," Mare shrieked inside his head while holding on to Rhaenyra. Thankfully, her words brought Eugene back to his senses. He immediately linked the rosary around her neck with a click. He was about to quickly retreat when Christina suddenly grabbed his hands. "Sir Eugene," she called out as she intertwined her hands with Eugene's into praying hands. "I am glad you returned safely." She peered upwards with moist eyes. Eugene could clearly feel the warmth permeating the back of his hands. Eugene could only remain silent as he gulped loudly. Seeing his reaction, Christina released her hands with a small smile. "He's reacting, sister." "Indeed. It seems that conveying our heart to Hamel last time was effective." "Yes, undoubtedly. That foolish man doesn't understand anything that isn't direct. In that sense we possess an advantage over Sienna. That girl is quite shy, so she won't easily confess to Hamel even after reuniting." After traveling with Sienna for over a dozen years, Anise had a perfect grasp of her character. Within the fairy tale that the two had co-authored, the single line Sienna had carved at the end had been the bravest, boldest move she had made in her life. "Sienna, I liked you. So, are we taking this back to the Lionheart mansion?" asked Sion, stealing a glance at Raizekia's corpse. They had no more business in the Samar rainforest. Although they had not yet claimed half of the spoils after defeating the Coachella tribe, Ivatar would ensure it was delivered to the Lionheart family. "You go back first," Eugene responded. "Why?" Sion asked with a surprised face. "I'm going to stop by Aroth," proclaimed Eugene. He had 30 days remaining. It was already a tight schedule even if he were to return directly from the center of the rainforest. So what if he were to be delayed by 1 or 2 days because he had stopped by his family? Eugene shuddered as he imagined Sienna's wrath. Chapter 305, Sienna Meridian 1. Bonus image. After passing through the trade city in Samar, they reached the border of Kiel, where Eugene would part ways with Sion. "Make sure to explain things properly to the Patriarch and Lady Ancilla," Eugene instructed Sion. Before leaving, they hadn't told the Lionhearts anything about the war in Samar. However, with how large the scale of the battle had been, and since the eyes of the Lionheart clan weren't completely blind, news of the war in the rainforest should have already reached them by now. Ancilla's eyes might just roll back into her head in a faint once she heard that the next patriarch of the family, her son whom she cherished so terribly, had been to such a dangerous battlefield. So Eugene had requested that Sion make his way back to the Lionhearts before that could happen and tell them about the spoils from their victory in advance. It's not like I've been sent back with any injuries and I'm returning with plenty of spoils, so Mother and the Patriarch should be overjoyed instead of concerned, Sion scoffed. After Uid had left for Arath and Eugene was adopted into the main family, Ancilla had turned into a very soft-hearted mother. However, before that, during the days when Sion's rights of succession had been at stake, Ancilla was just as overbearing a mother as Tanis had been. Sion still had clear memories of that time, and even now that he had become an adult, his body still froze up whenever he imagined the sight of an enraged Ancilla. Honestly speaking, Sion was still afraid of her. So even though his earlier words might have been said with a calm expression, on the inside, Sion was still worried that Ancilla might be angry with him. "Don't be afraid, man," Eugene encouraged him. "Just the spoils you've received from Ivatar alone could exceed the Lionheart clan's budget over the next several years. And the corpse of an ancient dragon is something that an emperor wouldn't be able to purchase even if he sold off his entire empire." That's right," Sion said hesitantly. Eugene continued his persuasion. "Then there's the other thing, apart from all of the material stuff. You've also received a different kind of benefit, haven't you? After all, didn't you say you'd reach the 5th star soon? I'm sure the Patriarch and Lady Ancilla will be more excited about your achievements than anything else." "That makes sense," Sion said slowly as his stiff face relaxed under Eugene's encouragement. Soon Sion nodded with a broad smile overflowing with confidence. "You can count on me. I'll take care of everything such that none of the sparks from us going off without permission will land on you." There was an old saying that enough praise could even make a bear dance. As Sion walked off at a brisk pace, Eugene sent him away while waving his hand, thinking of that proverb. Well, it wasn't like Eugene had lied about anything. It was true that Sion had grown greatly over the course of this war, so even Ancilla couldn't be too angry if he returned home while carrying plenty of loot. After seeing off Sion, the rest of the party traveled through the warp gate that took them straight to Arath. After that, Eugene's party of 4 naturally parted company with Lovelian and Melkith. The 2 Tower Masters had promised that they wouldn't inform Aratha's royal family or anyone else about Sienna's recovery in advance. Eugene saw them off as they both returned to their respective towers. Then he headed to the downtown area of Arath along with Christina. "Let me ask you this just in case, Hamel," Anise suddenly spoke up, using Christina's mouth. While handing a lollipop to Rhaenyra, who was holding on tightly to her other hand, Anise turned to look at Eugene and asked, "When you leave for your meeting with Sienna, I hope you don't intend to go there looking like that." Thanks to making haste on their return journey, they arrived a day earlier than the 30 days Sienna had promised. While scanning Eugene's appearance from head to toe, Anise continued, "No matter what you might look like, that chick Sienna is sure to greet you with a happy smile. But if at all possible, I would prefer it if you try to dress up a bit fancier before you meet with her, Hamel." "And what's so wrong with my current appearance?" Eugene protested. "I don't feel like I'm lacking anything, no matter what angle you might look at me from. Hamel, I'm well aware that your face is a lot more handsome than it was in your previous life, but it's also a disadvantage because you tend to evaluate yourself too generously." But then again, you were just like that in your previous life, weren't you?" Anise said, cocking an eyebrow with a smirk. Then she sighed. "Though the truth is, the most frustrating thing about this argument we're having is that even I can't really think up a reasonable response to refute those arrogant words of yours. However, the important thing right now isn't my mood and opinion on the matter. It's what Sienna's will be." Anise narrowed her eyes as she scanned Eugene from head to toe once more. Unfortunately, it was just as Eugene had said. Even though they had been traveling at a brisk pace for nearly a month, there still wasn't the slightest flaw in Eugene's appearance. If she really had to pick one thing, it might be that Eugene's disheveled hair looked a bit shaggy. However, even with shaggy hair like that, as long as one had a handsome face, it would come off looking like a wild style instead of feeling unkempt. His clothes, which had been cleaned every day with magic, also looked a bit frayed, but instead of looking slightly shabby, they instead seemed vintage. Ahem, Anise let out a low cough as she shook her head. With how cool Eugene looked in her eyes, he should also look the same in Sienna's, but since they had the opportunity, Anise wanted to do something special for their reunion, which was taking place after 300 years, that would make Sienna even happier. "Sister, strictly speaking, it's not like this is really their first time meeting each other after so long, right?" Christina pointed out. "That might be the case, but the previous encounters between Sienna and Hamel were always coincidental, miraculous, sudden, and unusual. However, this time, aren't they finally meeting each other after actually setting a date? Anis argued back. Christina hesitated. What you're saying is, this means that Sir Eugene and Lady Sienna's next meeting is going to be a DD date. Even if it is, it definitely won't be as fun as the date we enjoyed together, Anis reassured her. According to my research, Aroth doesn't have anything like a fireworks festival scheduled for tomorrow. Thank goodness that's the case, Christina said with a heartfelt sigh of relief. First of all, Hamel, let's start by tidying up that messy hair of yours. It might look pretty good currently, but with just a little overall trimming, it will look much better, Anis proposed. Eugene wasn't given any right to veto her decision. And when it came to things like this, Anis was as deliberate and thorough as ever. Anis had approached Melkith for help even before they had arrived at the city, so she had her pick of the most skilled hair salons in all of Pentagon. Under the usual circumstances, it would have been impossible for them to enter one of these salons without a reservation. But with Melkith's letter of introduction, Eugene found himself in one of the salon's chairs without going through any complicated procedures. In his entire life, this was Eugene's first time coming to a place like this. So what did he usually do to take care of his hair? Nina took care of his hair whenever he was at the main estate, and while he was studying abroad in Aroth, Eugene had just haphazardly cut it by himself. Here, cut it right here. But don't cut anything over there. We have to retain a bit of that wild feeling, Anis instructed. Although Anis was just as much of a stranger when it came to hairstyling, she insisted on clinging to the hairdresser's side and kept interfering throughout the haircut. Even so, a pro was still a pro. The hairstylist managed to accommodate all of Anis's requests without ever revealing any trace of displeasure. After Eugene's hair was cut, his eyebrows were trimmed, and even his scalp and face received attention. The cosmetic essence that was created through a combination of magic and alchemy gave a soft glow to Eugene's already naturally clear skin. Seeing his new appearance, Anis unconsciously clutched at her chest while Christina had to swallow back a gulp. Before leaving the hair salon, they were also given a single-use magic comb that would allow Eugene to recreate his current hairstyle by brushing the comb through his hair. The next place they headed to was a tailor that was also recommended by Melkith. This time, Anis and Christina watched, chewing their fingernails in intense focus, as Eugene tried on various outfits. After he had tried on several different clothes, Anis and Christina jointly decided that the one that fit Eugene perfectly was a neat-looking tuxedo. Anis hummed thoughtfully, "With this tuxedo, you should slightly reduce the size of your cloak and reshape it to look like a coat. Yes, that's it. Perfect, let's go with that." But was there really a need to go this far? At some point in the middle of the chaos, Eugene had lost track of why they were doing all of this, but even so he didn't reject any of Anis's suggestions. This was because he knew full well that, at times like this, it would just be easier on his mind and body to quietly go along with her orders. By the time they had finished all their preparations, night had already fallen. When they arrived at the hotel they had booked for their accommodation, Anis glanced at Eugene right as she was about to enter her room and asked, "What are you going to do for the present?" "What present?" Eugene asked in confusion. Anis gasped, "Toway. Hamel, were you really intending on showing up empty-handed?" Mare also chimed in, "Sir Eugene, really? Were you really going to go there without bringing anything? Even though you gave Lady Anis a necklace as a gift." That's because it was Anis's birthday," Eugene defended himself weakly. "It's true that it was my birthday at that time, but your meeting tomorrow will be just as important and exciting to Sienna as if it were her birthday," Anis lectured. "Yes, that's right," Mare chimed in. This time even Mare couldn't help but feel grateful to Anis. Standing by Rhaimyra's side, Mare stopped eating her ice cream to glare at Eugene. "How about a bouquet?" Eugene awkwardly proposed. "You should think about it yourself, Hamel," Anis ordered. "After all, you did come up with the idea of giving me my necklace all on your own." She had already given him more than enough help. Or at least that was what Anis thought as she headed into her room. "What do you think about giving her ice cream as a present?" Rhaimyra, who had entered Eugene's room along with Mare, suggested. Just as Eugene had expected, Rhaimyra didn't feel depressed or resentful of Eugene due to Raizakia's death. This was because there hadn't been anything like fatherly affection between them, and it had been a great shock to Rhaimyra when she was swallowed whole by Raizakia. Rhaimyra cheerfully continued, Ice cream is sweet, refreshing, and delicious, don't you think? No matter who it is, if they receive a lot of ice cream as a present, they're sure to be happy. Do you really think Lady Sienna is a simple little girl like you? Mare scoffed. Rhaenyra retorted, even though you say that, Mare, you're the one who stole and ate more than half of the ice cream that originally belonged to this lady. Food that you've stolen from someone else always tastes more delicious, Mare professed without feeling an ounce of guilt. There was no point in listening any closer to the conversation between those two. As Eugene sat down in a chair, he pondered what kind of gift he should prepare for Sienna. The first thing that came to mind was a bouquet of flowers. He had thought that was a perfectly fine present to give. However, was it really a bit too simple? Then next up was, since Sienna was a wizard, how about a staff? But she already had Akasha, didn't she? Ah, Eugene gasped as he suddenly recalled something. Her first reaction was anger. Sienna had just arrived at her mansion in Arath. The mansion had been erected on a site personally chosen by Sienna and had been built to reflect Sienna's ideal vision for her future. Since 200 years had passed, she had thought that it might have changed a bit. However, even though she had expected some changes, hadn't things changed a bit too much? The peaceful and quiet forest had become a bustling plaza, and the river that glistened in the sunlight and was filled with the stars at night had been completely filled in. As for the mansion, fortunately the building itself remained intact. But what's with that statue? At the center of the Meridian Square, which had been named after her, stood a statue of Sienna holding up a staff. When Sienna saw this statue, her whole body shuddered as she cringed. It was certainly an accurate depiction of her. However, when she thought about the countless people who came looking for her statue every day to stand and pray in front of it, Sienna couldn't help but feel embarrassed. Just how much money have they made from selling my image? Sienna grumbled. Admission prices for entry to Meridian Square and Sienna's mansion were exorbitant. Even so, there was an endless flow of tourists and examinees taking the public recruitment exams of the Towers of Magic streaming in, so much so that there were even lines. Do they really think I picked this country to research magic just so they could make money off of me and fill their own treasuries? Sienna growled, clenching her fists in anger before turning her head to one side. Focusing her gaze on the center of the capital city of Pentagon, she could see the royal palace of Abram, which had been built in the middle of a lake. Even without witnessing all of this, Sienna had been thinking of visiting them sooner or later in order to discuss the issue of their treatment of Mare. But seeing as she had finally returned to Arath, Sienna felt that it wouldn't be enough to just rely on her words alone. But she couldn't allow herself to go there and pick a fight right away, as now wasn't the right time. Sienna took a deep breath and turned her head back once more. Looking at a clock tower erected nearby, the time was a little past 11:30. Everything is fine, Sienna tried to tell herself. Her heart, which had just been pounding in rage, was now racing for a different reason. Sienna spun around while covering her own burning cheeks. She tried to calm herself. I've completely reconstructed my body and my clothes. I've made sure to put on new clothes. The clothes she had worn before being sealed within the World Tree were already all worn out. As such, Sienna had made new clothes for herself to wear. Just in case he might think that she looked strange, as soon as Sienna had arrived in Arath early this morning, she had looked around the city and taken references from the clothes of the passers-by. Everything was fine. With all her preparations, she had done enough research to blend in nicely with the current era without giving off the feeling of someone from the past. Although she had already confirmed this, why was her heart still pounding so fast? While taking a few more deep breaths, Sienna headed towards her mansion. Her mansion was swarming with people. There were some people who couldn't get in time and were now standing in line outside. Then there were all the employees who guarded and maintained the mansion. These were far too many people. In her heart, Sienna really wanted to kick everyone out, but she just let out a sigh and shook her head. Still, these people came all the way here because they truly respect me and want to pray to me. They've even had to pay a lot of money to do so. Such thoughts softened Sienna's heart. In the end, Sienna didn't drive any tourists away and entered her mansion without raising any sort of fuss. Naturally, she didn't pay the entrance fee. The guards and the tourists weren't able to pick up on Sienna's presence even as she passed right in front of their noses. There was still a bit of time left before their promised meeting time. Sienna was going to take a look around the mansion in an attempt to calm her loudly racing heart. Although all of the scenery surrounding her mansion had undergone changes, The structure of the mansion and the furniture inside had been preserved to look just as they had been 200 years ago. Nothing had changed. After taking a walk through the halls, Sienna headed for her study in the annex. There were 2 study rooms in her mansion. The study in the annex, where Sienna had often dreamt up plans for the future, only stored books meant for casual reading. Books that were related to magic had deliberately been excluded from this library. Thanks to that, there were fewer tourists in the annex study. That being said, it still wasn't anything close to quiet, but Sienna was able to tolerate at least this level of noise. Sienna's footsteps came to a stop in front of her rocking chair by the fireplace. This fireplace had never seen much use. Especially in the 200 years since Sienna had disappeared, this fireplace had never once been used, so it was perfectly clean without any trace of ashes. Upon seeing this sight, Sienna let out a snicker. Even the rocking chair in front of the fireplace, seeing how tidy it was without any sign of wear, it seemed that no one had dared to sit in it. "There's an alarm spell on top of the preservation spell," Sienna observed. "I guess it's meant to stop tourists from sitting on it." Such spells had been placed all over the mansion. Sienna snickered as she stretched her fingers out towards the fireplace. Whoosh! Inside the clean and tidy fireplace, a flame suddenly erupted. "Ah! What the?" The tourists let out cries of surprise as the guards came rushing over. They immediately tried to extinguish the fire in the fireplace, but it was impossible for them to extinguish the flames ignited by Sienna's magic. Sienna giggled as she left the annex in an uproar. The place in this mansion that attracted the most tourists was the magic study room in the basement of the mansion. Sienna had spent most of her life researching magic within that study. Perhaps because of that, she didn't really feel like going there right now. "Isn't it noon yet?" Sienna thought impatiently. Why does time have to pass so slowly? While rubbing her still pounding chest, Sienna climbed the stairs in the hallway. This place was the second most crowded place within the mansion, the landing on the stairs connecting the main hall to the second floor. This landing was placed right in front of the portrait of the wise Sienna that was hung on the wall in the middle of the hall. "I need you all to be quiet for now," Sienna muttered as she lifted a finger. She didn't have Akasha or any other staff on her, but that didn't pose any problems for Sienna. The spell she cast was activated without alerting any security spells in the mansion. The people gathered in front of the portrait began to leave one by one. Without even thinking about why they were doing it, they either headed down to the hall on the first floor or went up to the second floor. Finally, the landing in front of the portrait was left completely empty and silent. Standing in front of her own portrait, Sienna stared right into it. It had been 200 years ago that this portrait was painted. The king of Arath at the time had personally requested that it be made, saying that it should be left as a record for future generations. When she refused to do so, even her disciples were driven to come to her and beg her to reconsider. Left with no choice, Sienna reluctantly agreed. Wearing her formal robes, Sienna had sat down in a chair in front of the painter. She hadn't even wanted this portrait to be taken, and the Sienna from 200 years ago, usually found it difficult to smile. The rare times that she felt able to smile were when she was talking to a niece or her other comrades. Apart from that, the few other times she found herself smiling came after she had created Mare. The painter responsible for painting her portrait had banged his head against the ground, begging Sienna to smile, even if it was ever so slightly. Since the portrait was meant to be left for future generations, he said they shouldn't leave behind a cold expression like the one Sienna had on at that moment. This request just made Sienna feel tired and annoyed. Since she found herself incapable of smiling, Sienna just told him that if he really wanted to leave behind a portrait of her with a smile, he should just draw it on his own. That was how this portrait had been created. She had a soft smile that was different from her usual expression. The painter had done his best to infuse a sense of benevolence into Sienna's expression. A living legend, an arch-wizard who had left her name in myth, and a goddess of magic. These were the titles that had been attached to Sienna in that era. He had wanted the future generations to be able to see Sienna, look up to her and respect her just as they did. So the painter had drawn a portrait of the wise Sienna with a benevolent smile. "It really doesn't suit me," Sienna said as she chuckled at her own portrait. She had had the exact same thought when she first saw this portrait 200 years ago. Sienna tried to smile like how her face in the portrait was smiling, but she couldn't make it work. As her awkwardly raised lips returned to their usual position, She stretched her hand toward her portrait. A gust of wind suddenly blew in. There were no open windows, but the wind that blew through the mansion was as fresh as if it had just come from a forest. Sienna turned her head, surprised by the sudden gust of wind. At that moment the wind picked up ever so slightly and blew past Sienna. Her hat was blown away. Sienna lifted her head as she pressed down her fluttering hair with both hands. She saw her hat, which had flown away in the wind, was caught in somebody's hands. The hairstyle and clothes worn by the man who caught her hat were so stylish that they captured her attention with just a glance. Sienna's eyes widened into circles as she took in his appearance. "I've found you," Eugene said with a grin as he waved the hat that he had caught in his hands.